You're listening to Online Pet Health Podcasts with Dr. Megan Kelly. Continuing education for veterinarian rehabilitation therapists. Learn more at onlinepethealth.com.
Hey vet rehabbers, welcome to the Veterinary Rehabilitation Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Kelly. This week's podcast, however, is a team effort from Online Pet Health, and our veterinary physiotherapist, Anae Lloyd, will be interviewing Rebeka Zsoldos. Rebeka is involved in research in horses, looking at the function of the splenius muscle as an extensor and a stabilizer, and they look at basically the activity of the splenius muscle through the walk and trot. So one of the benefits of Online Pet Health members is our research refresh, which we do on a monthly basis. And this is Anae's baby. Anae is absolutely passionate about research. So anything to do with research, she gets really, really excited. So the opportunity to be able to talk to Rebeka about her research after having just done a research refresh on this exact paper was so exciting for her. So they had a fabulous, fabulous interview, and I'm sure you're all going to enjoy it. This one here is for our equine vet rehabbers. Enjoy the podcast.
Good morning, Rebeka. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Anne. I'm doing fine, thank you. Thank you for having me on this podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. I really look forward to learning from you today. Rebeka is a researcher that is the main author in one of the papers we've just released in our research refresh on the equine platform. And so I'm really excited to be chatting to you about the splenius muscle and about some of the research that you've been doing lately in this area, and not only the research that you've done, but some that has come out from other researchers in the industry. So before we get started chatting about the splenius muscle and the biomechanics of the neck, won't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, about what drives you and what motivates you to be doing research?
Interesting question. So that's a very complex answer. Probably for this one. So currently I'm an equine science lecturer at the University of Queensland in Australia. And originally my background, as many of us who are working with horses, it started as a hobby, started to ride, and then I was traditionally trained to become a trainer, and then moving along the line, I switched basically my hobby to becoming my profession. So my original degree is in, my Master of Science degree is in agricultural engineering with a major in animal breeding, but I had a focus on horse breeding. And that's how I got into the topic, basically, of working with horses and looking how they move. So that's how everything started. And after my master degree, I was fortunate to move on and work with established researchers from equine biomechanics in Vienna at the University of Veterinary Medicine in Vienna, and that's where I completed my PhD. And that's how my journey started, and I decided that after that I really want to focus on research, and did a couple of years of postdoctoral research work with different people and on different projects. And now at the moment, being a lecturer, I'm also teaching the new generation, and as well basically building up my research group where I'm focusing really on muscle mechanics.
That's really, really cool. So what drives you to look at the muscle mechanics? Like, why is that your thing?
So I was really much taken away basically with all of the results what I have seen from my previous research group, from the Movement Science Group Vienna. Mm-hmm. And they have a very long tradition of working with EMG, and that's how I got into the topic. And I'm really interested to see what's happening within the muscle. So it's really these mechanical parts of understanding how the control process is coming. So I often say, when people ask me what is the most interesting part for me, is obviously the neuromuscular control part of how muscles are activated and how they work together. And that's really going down on the pathway of looking structure and function together, so really the physiology part of it, and then obviously trying to find connection points where we could develop further to see different applications and see how we could assess these muscles. So that's very interesting for me, and as I said, it has many aspects, and I enjoy the work of working with different researchers, such as physiotherapists or veterinarians, or very often also computer scientists, and that just makes the diversity to the job by itself.
That is very, very interesting. I have to say, since I've been doing our monthly research refresh, I find myself picking more and more kinematic studies and movement studies and biomechanically based things, and month after month I'm like, again I did it again. So it's an area that fascinates me as well, and especially if we start to look at when in the gait cycle the muscles are activating, like what is their function really, what are they actually doing? Because we can look anatomically at the insertion and origin of a muscle and the bone levers and see in our minds how it's going to act, but a muscle doesn't act alone, does it? It's part of a massive system, and even though that's what it says in our heads, we can't, like, to isolate it to one specific action it's too small when we put it into the whole picture. So it's very interesting to look at the EMG readings and to see those little peaks and soft, like when it's just activating. I mean, it's almost never doing nothing, is it?
Yeah, so certainly that's also one of the things which fascinated me from the very beginning, that basically the EMG is a tool which is giving us kind of like a microscope within the muscle fibers to see what's happening from an activation profile perspective. And it's certainly what I have seen most of the time, that there is always a certain level of activation within the muscles because of having different roles of the muscles, such as stabilization and these type of things. We have a baseline activation, obviously, from all of these muscles.
So amazing. Okay, so let's speak a little bit about the splenius muscle specifically. All right, so
Yes.
What do we know now about the action of the splenius muscle?
So I don't think that we know enough about the splenius, and then that's absolutely my favorite muscle. So every time if I plan a new experiment, then the splenius has to be on it, and my students know it, that they have to know this muscle very, very well. So I do try to integrate it into my teaching as well, that for the head-neck complex, obviously the splenius is a very, very important stabilization muscle. I somehow, if I may just say a little bit about how I came to this topic.
Yes.
Basically, we were looking into different neck muscles and their functions. And in some of the anatomy books, basically the splenius has been categorized as an extensor muscle, which is true, but also it has a super important role in stabilization. And that's how I came to this, because I was building up a 3-dimensional model of the head and the neck from the horse. And for vertebral stabilization, this is also a very important surface muscle. And in general, what we know a lot from the splenius of what type of functions do during different gaits, and many people looked at it. Also, now we have an extensive studies, not just from on the treadmill with the control speed, but also people starting to move away from the labs and applying this technology on basically on an overground setting where, for example, the horse is moving under a rider and these type of things. So it's still not answering your question, but basically it's, if I would say, definitely what we have seen when we, so first of all, the paper, I guess what you were discussing earlier, was looking into the muscle during walk and trot. And I know that you discussed this with your audience, so I will just repeat a little bit about it. But so the splenius muscle has this tonic activity with these two peaks is very beautiful when you see it at walk and trot. It has a lot to do also, again, what I mentioned for stabilization. So when we were looking at lateral bending movement from the vertebrae, then we have seen this also, that they have this supporting role just to keep the neck, head and the neck in position. One of the things which I always very often mention, that because of looking each individual vertebra segment and their movement, what we have seen is normally that we get more tensed muscles, and therefore also very likely higher activity from the splenius when the horses start trotting, because with the higher speed, obviously all of the segments needs more stabilization, and they hold the entire neck more together, so to say. So we will become less range of movement between each vertebra level, and with that we have a different type of activity from the splenius for the stabilizing role. Then from this step we moved on to look at functional tasks from one of the muscles was the splenius, and we looked at what the splenius does during what we call normally a carrot stretch. So for example, in a neutral position and a fully extended position, so head high up, and the fully flexed one, when we ask the horse to flex it with a carrot in the direction towards the chest. So that's where we have seen obviously a very important role of extension, that this muscle is really firing up, but it has a very significant role also in a neutral position. So that again comes back to the stabilization. Okay. The other type of thing what we were looking also is looking at this muscle with ultrasonography, because we wanted to see also how these fibers are changing. So how much we could actually track along the line when we are mimicking what we have seen with the EMG, basically this flexion and extension. And we could see also how these structures are elongating and creating these activity patterns. The other thing is obviously very important to mention, that when we talk about splenius muscle, that we have the electrodes on a certain surface level. So obviously I can go in a specific depth within the muscle, but I'm not recording the entire muscle. So with surface EMG, we have a detection depth, which means that we are really on the surface level of the muscle. And if we look at the anatomical structure, it would mean that we are only registering that upper layer from the muscle and not the entire muscle. And obviously, for example, with the splenius also we have different branches, but we know how they are attaching to the different vertebra levels. And my sensor was only on one of the main segments, so it doesn't reflect the entire muscle.
Okay, so that's actually one of the questions that I had, because obviously where the splenius is going underneath more superficial muscles, you can't target it. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so it gives us a piece of the puzzle, but it's still only a piece. It's so exciting. Okay, so basically the splenius is more of a stabilizing muscle than a mobilizing muscle, correct? And especially as you're coming into higher speeds, we see more muscle activity as the segments move less, so we can say that it's stabilizing, right?
Yes, but obviously I would not neglect the extension importance of the muscle, but I feel from a core stability perspective, which we like to talk about it because of the looking at the entire spine, and for the neck part of the spine, for the vertebral column, the splenius is one of the most important muscles in my eyes. That's based on my research and yeah.
Okay, I love it. So we've spoken about walk and trot, and those are in just in neutral head positions, right? And the extension and the flexion of the neck. So it's not really activating much in that carrot stretch. Is that right? Yes. So if we then go on to looking at how it's affected during lameness, I know that was one of the points you brought up in your paper, is that at the end of the day, we want to be able to see what happens when there's a forelimb lameness and we have that shift in movement. So do we know yet what is happening to the splenius muscle when there's a forelimb lameness?
It is obviously very hard to say exactly what's happening, because it's going to come down to each individual case and what type of forelimb lameness. But if we would look at it from a compensatory way of seeing a forelimb lameness, then we could assume that how we normally assessing, for example, if a horse is lame and then looking at the head movement, obviously we see that, and then connecting it to the forelimb movement as well, then we could already predict this, that the splenius will have also an important role in that, of how is dealing with this compensatory movement of having more a bigger step on the healthy limb. For example, if we talk about single limb lameness, single limb forelimb lameness, then the other side is going to have less weight bearing, obviously, from the lameness, and that needs to be picked up also with the neck muscles. And so that side needs to hold on more. So that would mean that side is getting a bit more tighter, because it's doing more work than where we have the other side, where we have on the other limb, where we have the painful limb, basically. That would be the side which is trying to pick up with that. So that would be one scenario, but obviously it also depends on the degree of the lameness. I should add it to it, because it could be that the neck is working very hard because it wants to also compensate for that type of lameness. But again, it comes back to the situation. But that's definitely where I could see that from a practical sense, that maybe that's where we are starting to see things, that this area is getting very tight because of being overworked and not working in a symmetrical way.
Yeah, and I mean, clinically, I think we've all seen cases where, if there's a chronic, very low level lameness, where there's that asymmetry in the muscle development in that area of the neck, which could absolutely be attributed to the splenius. And so I think that's an interesting one to think about, and definitely very relevant for us, but we don't have much data there yet, do we?
No, that hasn't been different clinical cases, basically, and having having results from these clinical cases. So the field is definitely moving in the direction, but there is a lot of work needs to be established. And at the moment, most of the researchers are investigating a healthy situation and trying to work towards that. We will move slowly when we have an established system to start working on clinical cases and also better understand how we would plan, for example, a rehabilitation plan, and see these type of things of using this tool to aid therapy plans and these type of things.
So I'm getting way ahead of myself. Obviously, we're still getting to that, but I mean, a good invitation, right, for anyone who's interested to start looking at doing research in that direction. Okay, so let's go back then to what is normal. We see riders riding in many different positions, placing the horse in very collected, flexed positions of the neck, sometimes with the neck really high, sometimes with a long and low posture, sometimes in a very extended posture, like when they're racing. So do we have data on what is happening to the splenius in these different head and neck positions, under saddle or not under saddle? Yep. Do we have any information on that?
So the majority of the work has been done on the head-neck positions from various research groups, where they looked at the head-neck complex with a kinematic analysis. There's only a few who worked with the EMG, and some of them were without the rider and with the rider. So comparing these different positions, definitely it's going in that direction of what is more or less know now that when we have this extreme hyperflex position from the head neck, then that's also not ideal, so to say, for the muscle. So the activity pattern is going to be different because of creating this extreme tightness from the muscle, that it can't function in the way how we want it. We want this elongation. So when we're talking about a collected horse moving forward, stepping under, then we ideally looking for something that those muscles can work properly. So I would say more we don't really want to have the flexed head position, but it's more the extended head position, and obviously the entire spine has to work with that together. And that would mean also, because we are extending a little bit the head, so I'm just talking at the moment from more the upper neck part, so the cranial vertebra column, that would mean that muscle is going to reach the highest activity because it's engaging the head and the neck in a way that the horse can move forward and elongate its entire body and being a bit more collected.
Okay, I like it. Do we have information on lateral bending? Is the I know in the research we covered with yours, the splenius muscles on the left and the right were activating together. Are there scenarios where they're activating individually?
Do you mean like handedness or these type of asymmetries or these type of things what we are normally seeing? Because that's a very interesting topic also.
I wasn't thinking about handedness, but let's speak about handedness because that's even better.
Yeah. So we have seen it in most of the horses that they have a preferred side. And I'm very much interested looking into this topic because we have a traditional way how we work with the horses. So for example, for me as an English rider, we always started our work on the left-hand side, for example. And that's a normal way of in many countries that you are leading the horse from the left-hand side, and that meaning that the horse is going to turn towards you a little bit, and that would mean that's already altering the two-side activity pattern. So that was also what we recorded in our paper when we had the horses on the treadmill, that the person who was holding the horse was standing on the left-hand side, even though we tried to keep them on the middle, but just because of that's how they used to for the normal handling, they have this. Now I believe that there is a lot of other factors which are influencing this. So there is a very extensive research going on looking at these things from a kinematic way and also from a force evenness and symmetry and handedness. So these topics are going in a way hand in hand, so to say. I think it's becoming more and more important of understanding that we have horses where they have naturally a preferred side. So it's not just the human interaction with the horse, but they have a preferred side. Mm-hmm. So the classical way of how we are looking at now, it's even in early ages, so like in foals, there are theories that when they start grazing, they are putting 1 foot forward, and that's going to become their preferred side and preferred limb. So I don't know if somebody should look into this. I find it very fascinating. And then obviously this is going to also become interesting how we train these horses because of having that preferred side. So it might be that they will be always preferred to canter, for example, on that side, having the leading limb on that side. And then we need to target those horses to work more on symmetries, so to say. So it just goes on along this line, if it makes sense.
Yes, it does. It does. I think I agree with you. Handedness is so interesting because it's definitely not just coming from us leading them on the left-hand side, although that is definitely a factor and something we should stop doing. But we looked at it a little bit a couple of months ago where we did a paper on birth trauma in foals, and there's a theory that a lot of foals are born with rib fractures or trauma to the joint between the rib and the spine. And now obviously the joint names are out of my head, but that initial birth trauma could be one of the things that determined their early preference to one side or the other when they're grazing, and that trauma will stop being painful and uncomfortable very quickly because they heal so quickly when they're foals, which means if we look at them a couple of weeks down the line, we won't find the trauma anymore, but we'll find the neural patterns would already have been developed of where they prefer to canter, how they prefer to turn, how they prefer to graze, because they've learned that already in those first weeks. So I think it's a very interesting topic, and it's definitely something we need more, we need more answers about, because is that all it is? Is it all about that neural development in those early days and weeks? Or is there more? Are there more factors that are contributing as they grow older and as they, and as they develop? But I think it's certainly relevant enough for us to say that when we start bringing them into work, we have to realize that they will be asymmetrical, and we have to take that into consideration before we do any physically demanding work, that we start to correct that asymmetry in their bodies and start to teach them to move in all directions in a balanced and straight way. So I'm glad that came up, because I think that's so interesting, and we can see it goes down to the neural and muscle activation level when we see that difference in activation between the two sides of the splenius. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, if I may just add to this topic, because it fascinates me as well as you said it. And I would even go and trace it back more. And we are looking into this without telling too much what I'm doing at the moment. But I am very much on the pathway of looking into in which position, which is known for human babies, that even for these foals, when they are in the uterus, in which side they were laying most of the time. So there are theories of also combining this that might have an effect, like how they say it for humans that we are left and right-handed, and that's connected to that, for example. So we might be dealing something like that, which is coming from there. But as you said, there is so many other factors which we are going to influence them when they are born. So we believe that these foals are born with a preferred side, which is nature is given to them. So for people who are starting to work with these horses, they need to be aware of this, and not immediately starting to correct these asymmetries, but just working together with these asymmetries and understanding why this horse is doing this, or why this horse has a preferred side, and it might not come back to actually a structural problem.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love it so much. Okay, so let's change tacks and chat a little bit about surface EMG, because this is your preferred tool. Am I right? So tell me a little bit about how it works, why you prefer it. Just a little bit about the tool itself.
Yeah. So surface EMG is a very new tool in equine biomechanics research. It has been around for a couple of decades, but it's still in the development phase of establishing the technique by itself. So what it does is basically we have these surface sensors which is coming on the top of the muscle. And we are, as I said, it's kind of like scoping within the muscle to understand what's happening. So it's registering the action potentials, the electrical activity from the muscle, and this is what we see as basically coming out of as results. And then we start working with our signal processing, which is a very complicated process of getting our results, but it's definitely worth the effort. And I'm a big advocate for this, that more and more researchers are starting to use it. And I think it's becoming more and more important for our field, and hopefully one day it will be also useful for practitioners, because at the moment, more or less, this tool stays with the researchers because we need to establish a very good system. So if we compare it to human research, obviously they are much more ahead of us. They have a standardized system what they can use, and a network system where everybody can reach out and see how they need to work with different muscles. And at the moment, this is not existing for horses. So we are working on it as a community, that one day we will have an established network where people can reach out and understand, for example, just to give you an example, where do you put the sensor? Yeah, so that's where it starts. As we have discussed it with the Splenius, there is the origins, insertions, where do you put it? Where is the best location to put these sensors? So to imagine it, there are two different type of sensors. There are the ones which are having wires. That's how I start to work with these sensors. It's very complicated when you have, for each sensor, multiple wires. Nowadays, there is on the market another system which is wireless, obviously, and they become much smaller and lighter and easier to apply to the skin. So that's becoming more popular as well, because we can easily do measurements also outside and these type of things. But just coming back to why is it important to have this established network of all of the applications and how we deal with it. It's really starting how we standardize every step which is needed to acquire good quality data. So one of the things is it's a major rule, for example, that we are placing the sensors parallel to the fiber orientation. So that's where it becomes very important that you know your anatomy, obviously, and also very often we also ultrasound these muscles. So just to make sure, because obviously we have different horses, they have different lengths of neck, for example, just to see where we could have the best location for this muscle detection. Yeah? When we find the optimal place where to put the sensor, the next step would be basically deciding how do we fix these sensors to the skin. So that's where we are facing a lot of challenges, obviously with our data collection, because of seeing different conditions and how to, for example, how to prepare the skin to put the sensor on over this muscle. So it's the common technique at the moment, or the gold standard for human research as well, that we need a very clean and clear skin contact for the sensors. So that would mean that normally we are clipping the hair away from the horses and shaving and cleaning and all of these things, that's where the sensor goes on. Okay. I must say that there are research going on in two directions, where researchers looked at horses with very short hair, and it seems like that we are getting also reasonably good sensors, but at the moment that's the common practice, that we need a very clean surface to put these sensors on. But I can see that maybe how the sensors are developing as well, it may be possible for measuring over very, very thin hair and accessing those muscles. But obviously it's going to be depending on the horse and skin thickness and all of these type of things. So, okay, so we find the location, we prepare the skin, we are starting to connect these sensors to the skin. Basically is normally happening with an adhesive tape. We are leaving these sensors on, and then we can start our experiment. For example, let's say that horse is on a treadmill and we are turning on the treadmill, and then we are working with these sensors which is sending the signal throughout the telemetric system to the computer, and that's where we are starting registering these signals. Now, the next challenge is coming because of these sensors are obviously attached to the hair and the skin, because they need to sit on various locations. So I have worked also with the rectus abdominis, for example. So basically they are hanging from the belly and against gravity. So that's super challenging. And then just imagine a horse starting to walk, trot, and canter. What's happening with that sensor? So what we have seen is if we have an experiment which is running very long, that it will make it very difficult, because horses start normally sweating, and then that's where we start losing the contact. So that's where it gets very, very challenging to designing an experiment that we get these data what we want also from that speed level, what we are interested. So that's a lot of optimization which needs to be done.
Yeah.
But as I said, a lot of people are working on it. So I'm hopeful that this is becoming more and more frequent, that we can read these papers and see what how this tool become more and more relevant for various disciplines, so to say, because it's really that's the beauty of this technology, of that we can apply it for many different situations. So if I would just mention a couple of them, so obviously from a veterinary perspective, we could see, as you mentioned, for example, we could also investigate things with lameness. But from a therapy perspective, obviously for physiotherapists, it could become a very valuable tool to see a horse before and after treatment, for example. For the trainers and riders, that's again going to be very important. Which part of the muscle I'm starting to train, where my horse has a weakness, for example, and these type of things. So.
My imagination is going wild, imagining all the things that we could do with this. I think, wow, it can help us become more and more specific to what we need to achieve. That is just so exciting. Okay, so I think with that, we should wrap it up. Otherwise, this is going to get far too long. I think you've brought up some really, really interesting things, and I am hopeful that we will have many more of these conversations in the future, and investigate some different areas and some different things. Because you can't only be interested in the splenius, I think you have some other areas of special interest. So thank you so much for joining us today. I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure that our listeners have too.
Thank you for having me.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
Vet Rehabbers, for more information on how to take your career to the next level, go to www.onlinepethealth.com. Please don't forget to subscribe to my podcast so you'll get notified. I'm here every single week talking to vet rehabbers from all over the world, learning, and I would love you to join me. Hope you have an awesome day further. Cheers for now.